I'm Billy S, welcome back to the channel. This is part 2 of my community ranking of the Elden Ring base game's boss difficulty. Did you miss part 1? Click the card or use the link in the description, everything is explained there. I won't bore you with the usual spiel, let's just get straight into it. My community's hardest Elden Ring bosses, 30 to 11, ranked. Let me know your thoughts down below. At number 30, we have Glintstone Dragon Adula, who scored a total average of 4.95 out of 10. The second of the Field Dragon variants to appear on the rankings. While Adula is my personal favourite of the bunch, I can't deny that the lack of devastating status effects and AoEs makes them a tad easier than their brethren. Glintstone dragons have the ability to use glintstone sorceries in battle, meaning a lot of deadly ranged magic, alongside the usual fire breath that has been tinged blue with the arcane. While Smaragd, the first dragon of this type you'll encounter, is fairly easy, with just a simple homing comet shard attack to differentiate itself from Agil, Adula is a tad tougher. On top of Smaragd's base kit, Adula comes equipped with two rather nasty magic attacks to avoid. The first is a Crystal Burst, where various crystal shards will home in on the player, which can be tricky if you're not expecting it. And then there's the titular Adula's Moonblade, where the dragon flies up into the sky, creates a giant moonblade in its mouth, and swoops down to slash at you with that spin-to-win energy. And even if you dodge the main attack, there's still an Arc of Frost at the end which can catch you off guard. Adula is arguably also tough because of the arena, the Moonlight Altar. It's not flat terrain. It's a hill leading up to the Cathedral of Mana Celes, and I've personally always preferred to fight dragons on flat terrain because it's just easier to keep track of everything, less opportunities for the camera to go insane. There are no voter comments for Adula, but I suspect the voters just don't feel that strongly about this game's dragon fights anymore. We've talked about them to death. And when all four variants in the base game are so similar for the most part, it can feel like beating a dead horse. Or a dead Adula, I guess. At number 29, we have the Putrid Tree Spirit, who scored a total average of 5 out of 10. Take everything that was said about the ulcerated tree spirit in the last video, give it a little bit of rot, and you have the Putrid Tree Spirit. Now this is a variant that only appears 3 times in the game, with only one of those appearances being as an actual boss, and yet all 3 of those fights have left me with one thought: never again. Unlike the Putrid avatars on our last video, the tree spirits are so much more frantic in their movements, so trying to stop the rot from building up is a lot more difficult. Their grab attacks in Phase 2 become infinitely more dangerous as a result, with you getting instantly rotted from their flames should you be swept up, and overall they have more health than their regular counterparts to make the fight longer. I really struggled in my last playthrough against the War Dead Catacombs variant, no shame in that. I also like that all 3 of these bosses are in rot-based locations that make sense for their lore, but that also means that 2 of the 3 fights are just awful due to their arenas. The less I say about the Grand Cloister variant, the better. And the run back to the Haligtree variant drove me up the wall, so I don't really have the fondest memories here, especially as you need to defeat this one to access the rest of Millicent's questline. I'd say 5 out of 10 is valid because their moveset is exactly the same as their regular counterparts, you've just got to be careful of rot buildup and awful arenas. Voters? The Putrid Tree Spirit is annoying because it takes the relatively simple ulcerated tree spirit fight and adds Scarlet Rot to it. The fight is already annoying at this point due to its repetitive nature, adding a frustrating status effect does nothing to help that. The worst part about this fight is that the boss is just hard enough to struggle with, but just easy enough that you feel like you shouldn't. I really want to focus on that last line. Hard enough to struggle with, easy enough to feel like that shouldn't be the case. The psychological warfare From Software is conducting here is terrifying. A lot of the fights in the middle of the list share this exact sentiment, and it's a feeling I'm glad someone has managed to put into words for me, as it definitely matches my own experiences. On the flip side, Ulcerated Tree Spirit / Putrid Tree Spirit is my favourite non-remembrance boss, based on its creature design, its emphasis on trying to make the player too visually intimidated to focus properly, and its perfect medium difficulty. Not hard by any means, but still requires you to lock in and pay attention. Definitely a case of player-to-player basis with this opinion. Can't say I'm a fan of the visually intimidated aspect of this voter's review, it's the same reason most of us struggle with the consort in the DLC. But hey, whatever floats your boat, I'm not going to push you into the ocean. I do agree that it's a good lock-in and fight boss that can easily kill you if you're not paying attention regardless of level though, not to be underestimated. At number 28, we have the Godskin Apostle, who scored a total average of 5.12 out of 10. One of my favourite fights in Elden Ring, the Godskin Apostle can be fought solo at the Windmill Village, or in the depths of the Divine Tower of Caelid. At the former location, he's a simple enough fight, his Twin Blade moveset is easily blockable to start with, he doesn't use a ton of his Black Flame magic, and you'd be forgiven for thinking he's a simple fight. But then half health hits, and he activates his trap card. The Apostle can stretch his body, elongating in any direction he desires. What this means is you're stuck fearing for your life as this long boy whips around you like a slinky, with his range expanding tremendously to compensate for his new movement skills. He looks so initially unassuming, which makes the sudden arena control that the Apostle has seem far more intimidating by comparison, and you can't stay too close lest he charge up a Black Flame tornado and wipe off most of your health. In the Caelid Tower fight, he's at his hardest with a solid 13,596 HP, and a really high damage output since he has Dragon Barrow scaling. What this means is that I underestimated this fight on my last playthrough, and found myself fighting tooth and nail to stay alive, while the Apostle chased me down to slice me to ribbons with that windmill spin. It's the more annoying fight to reach because of all the platforming needed to make the trek, yet I think it's worth the journey to have a truly difficult solo fight against the Apostle. But because of that, I think that explains why the Apostle is only number 28 and not ranked higher, because most people face him at the Windmill Village, where his scaling is easier to handle and he only has 7,000 HP, which just isn't a lot at that point in the game. If people are voting based on that factor, yeah, he would be ranked pretty easy. No voter comments. I don't think it's a shock to say that all the Godskin voters would rather talk about a more infamous fight later in the game, you know? At number 27, we have Decaying Exeeks, who scored a total average of 5.18 out of 10. Honestly, I thought he'd be a little higher on the list, what with his ability to absolutely body anyone with Scarlet Rot at a moment's notice. To be blunt, I think his Rotting Miasma attack, where he covers the arena in a dense fog of damaging Scarlet Rot, which has a very hard to read wind-up, should get Exeeks above the 6-point mark. But hey, that's not what my community thought, I am just the messenger. Take away those Rot abilities, and Exeeks is just your standard dragon fight. He's got the same overall moveset, but with a healthy dosage of Malenia's Scarlet. From his Rot Breath attacks to his Stomp attacks that can kick up Rot Clouds to further status infect the player, it's a good thing there's a Sign of Grace nearby to make runbacks pretty easy, because you'll likely die here a few times. The only way to escape his major Rot attack is through Torrent, but if you miss time when you choose to flee, Torrent can end up dead, and you can end up stunned, and your body can end up poisoned. It's not a fun fight, because the moment the Rot hits, it really is over for you unless you have a specific healing item or the Flame Cleanse Me incantation, which just isn't an exciting gameplay loop for me personally. Though for my voters, we've got two different people on either side of the Exeeks argument, so let's have them fight it out. First up, the negative voter. Fighting Exeeks is like watching Survivor Thailand, Island of the Idols, and Redemption Island back to back. That is to say, it's toxic, it stinks, and it's no fun at all. As a fresh-faced Elden Ring newbie, I saw what I thought was a cool dragon and got walloped back to Godric's dungeons. Then I leveled up, gained confidence, and got whooped even harder the second time. To this day, he's still sitting in the middle of Caelid like the menace he is. A valid point to make. Regardless of your level, Exeek's main attacks that cause so much trouble among the player base are AoEs that siphon your health the longer you stay in them, potentially stagger locking you if you're not careful, and no amount of leveling can stop you from being caught in an animation loop of staggers, though I would take Exeek's over rewatching Survivor Thailand, Island of the Idols, and Redemption Island any day. And our positive voter comment? Well, they're more of a fan of rot bosses in general. I'll leave the full comment here, even though I think the Exeek segment is pretty small. As a Scarlet Rot enthusiast, I must say these things. Decaying Exeeks is the most misunderstood and underappreciated dragon boss, has similar attributes as Melania too if you think hard enough, so give my zombie dragon some love. Speaking of her, yeah, she's definitely the hardest fight because of her waterfowl dance routine. Putrid Avatar is fine, and Putrid Tree Spirit is just a nuisance to fight because like the other tree spirits, I don't like fighting their random spasms. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'ma take my good boy Rotten Stray Scar out for a walk to Caelid now. Cheers, Billy. Cheers to you as well, thanks for having some fun with your comment. I will never understand the Scarlet Rot love, but hey, I respect your opinions. I just wish you would explain why Exeeks is misunderstood. I love a hot take, but I'm an ex-history and English literature student. I need sources, I need evidence. And the only evidence I see in regards to Exeeks is the evidence of how many times he's killed people in Elden Ring because of his Scarlet Rot. At number 26, we have Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy, who scored a total average of 5.4 out of 10. Elden Ring's main gimmick fight, you take control of the Serpent Hunter Great Spear and are tasked with taking down a god-devouring serpent, who then turns out to be Rykard himself. One of the first fights on the list to have two very distinct phases, your mileage with this boss's difficulty will come from your ability to use the Serpent Hunter's moveset, as well as your ability to dodge the boss's main grab attack, something I was, and still am, woefully awful at. In the first phase, you're trying to keep the serpent to the center of the room while avoiding its swipe so you can keep stunning it with the charged heavy of the special blade. Leveling it up at a blacksmith can give you a little more leeway here, and overall I'd say this phase isn't terribly difficult. But phase 2, when Rykard's blasphemous blade makes an appearance, is a different story. The serpent has a massive sword he can cleave you in twain with, not to mention a host of hellish incantations. Rykard's Rancor is the most popular one as he summons fire skulls that create a line behind them as they travel, with a trail of explosions following in its wake. Now imagine this, but it's like 20 of them, and the sky is blood orange, coated in hellish clouds, and that's Rancor Storm. Easily one of the more visually stimulating attacks in the game, there's not much the player can do except dodge and weave, before rolling out of the way of his follow-up Taker's Flames attack. For me, Rykard's most difficult element was the lava surrounding his body, as if you found yourself backed against the wall of the arena, Rykard would be able to trap you in a lava pool and instantly kill you. It's a fight that demands more spatial awareness than some of the others on today's list, and that definitely raises the difficulty. But let's hear from our voter friends, shall we? Between Yhorm in Dark Souls 3, the Storm King in Demon Souls, I believe that Rykard is the best boss that uses the Storm Ruler or the Serpent Hunter gimmick. It's my favourite gimmick of all Souls, and I think it's handled perfectly here. Unlike Yhorm and Storm King, the fight isn't over once you pick up the weapon, you have to learn the snake and Rykard's attacks. I didn't know this was an optional boss when I encountered it, after all I hadn't gone to Leyndell yet, so seeing other people do this boss after Leyndell is fair enough, but I enjoyed the challenge of it all when I fought it. Big spectacle weapon mixed with fun big arena, atmospheric build-up and design, and well-telegraphed attacks made for my favourite fight in all of Elden Ring. I get how some people may like harder fights, but just let me have this, I love it, okay? Sorry for rambling on. No worries, man, I honestly agree. Rykard is the best variant of this gimmick because the fight is still challenging and engaging even after you've picked up the Serpent Hunter. It's not a game-winning item, but just a prerequisite for even having a shot at taking down Rykard. Does that make him hard? No, middle of the road for me. I think he's right where he needs to be on this list, but he's a mid-game fight anyway, I'd say it feels correct. Not everybody likes Rykard though. Rykard is by far the most overrated boss in my opinion. The first phase was just extremely boring. All his attacks are just very similar and not very interesting in my opinion. My experience from several playthroughs in the second phase has been hell, just getting pushed into a corner by the lava on the floor while a barrage of skull projectiles come flying towards you, not fun. I guess I see this point of view for sure. The visual clutter of Rykard's second phase can feel very intense, dare I say overwhelming, for a certain type of player. The skulls last for just long enough that you think, this is going on too long, before Rykard cuts through the storm with his sword. And I knew some of the voters would take the arena and Rykard's lava pools into consideration. Spatial awareness is so underrated in this fight, and if that doesn't click, you'll end up forced against the wall while he cooks your feet. I wouldn't personally say he's an overrated boss. I think in the grand scheme of Elden Ring he's quite fairly rated. I've just not seen anyone claim he's the best boss in the game or anything, but he at least challenges the player more than other gimmick bosses like the aforementioned Yhorm and Storm King from the prior FromSoft games. And sometimes that's all people need to big up a boss like Rykard in the community. At number 25, we have the Godskin Noble, who scored a total average of 5.43 out of 10. I knew from the get-go the Noble would land above the Apostle, what with his bulkier health bar and his more precise thrusting attacks. Not to mention, his main arena in the Volcano Manor is rather claustrophobic, with the only saving grace being the series of pillars you can use to kite around the Noble when you need to heal. Similarly to the Apostle, the true difficulty comes from the second half, where the Noble does a reverse Nikocado Avocado, as most of his attacks involve him creating weight to smash you into dust. Most infamously, his Sonic the Hedgehog style rolling attack that goes on for way too long, and has oddly difficult to time dodge windows. His rapier attacks get faster, with him being able to use repeating thrusts to poke you full of holes, should you fail to dodge that first hit, with his only easy attack to avoid being the Godskin Crushing move where he bloats his body upwards and attempts to slam into you from above. The Noble ends up having a similar attack speed to the Apostle, if not even faster, which just doesn't match the visual design and can throw off a lot of players, myself included. And it makes a certain late game duo fight an absolute nightmare, though as said, I doubt it's a surprise to say that the Godskin duo fight isn't in this video. You'll be waiting on part 3 for that one. At number 24, we have Mohg the Omen, who scored a total average of 5.46 out of 10. I decided to include Sewer Mohg more for my own amusement in this community ranking, as I was just curious as to how much easier or harder people found him in comparison to his main fight later down the line, and I'm pleasantly surprised to see him make 24th. Mohg the Omen is a durable and tanky encounter who helps players to learn the intricacies of Mohg's Phase 1 in a relatively safe way. He's also the guardian of the Frenzied Flame sub-area, so you've got an incentive to come down here and kill him. His main attacks are his trident thrusts and stabs, which are your standard fare when it comes to melee combos, with his special attacks being his various blood magics. The first is Blood Boon, where he'll pull a trail of blood from a tear in the air, which can be thrown in various different ways depending on his position. The second is Blood Flame Talons, where Mohg will slash the air in front of him, causing an explosion a few months later. Months! Moments, Billy! I'm pretty used to this attack now thanks to the promised consort fight in the DLC, but it's nice to see where it originated from. Mohg the Omen is a battle of attrition, where your ability to deal damage is directly tied to your ability to handle his small pool of moves, and if you don't learn his attacks, you won't win due to the higher than average health pool. And would you look at that, to my surprise, Sewer Mohg got a voter comment. I thought Lord of Blood would suck them all up, but hey, that's hype. As a way of apology, I will give some kind words to Mohg, but specifically Sewer Mohg. Unlike the real Mohg, he doesn't fire out big AoEs after every attack. Don't get me wrong, I love real Mohg. This does make him significantly easier, but also means his moveset, although challenging, feels extremely fair, and without getting into quality, his moves are telegraphed enough and enjoyable to learn. I personally found him oddly tricky, especially on my first playthrough. I remember feeling like he was very easy and intuitive, however I just kept dying to him. I probably sunk 10 attempts where I walked in feeling like I was about to steamroll him without taking a hit, only to somehow get hit by all 4 hits of a sneakily delayed combo, especially his Blood Flame slash that caught me every single time. A great example of how bosses like Moog teach you not to instantly react to attacks. Love to the big guy for his perfect level of challenge after trudging through the sewers. May he find peace in the Ketchup Dynasty. Sewer ketchup. Sewer Moog is just an underrated fight that helps players to learn about positioning and dodge timings in a way that feels inherently fun. Maybe not a fight for everyone, and certainly not too crazy on the difficulty, but that's more than enough for one who beat the allegations. At number 23, we have Loretta, Knight of the Haligtree, who scored a total average of 5.5 out of 10. We talked about her Karia mana fight in the last video, and I think the 1.44 boost in difficulty is warranted based on the changes to her battle at the Haligtree. Loretta, being a mage as well as an Albinauric, suffers from a lower health pool than most bosses, which certainly keeps her out of contention as one of the more difficult fights of the base game. To add to this, her fight is almost identical to the Karia mana variant, with the exception of one slightly enhanced attack and one brand new skill to add to her arsenal. Firstly, her Loretta's Great Bow sorcery is enhanced in the second half of the fight, firing 4 arrows instead of a single one, which will home in on the player's location. The dodge timing is still the same as before, but the penalty for failing is much more severe due to the extra projectiles. Secondly, Loretta's Slash is a large melee combo where she imbues her sickle with magic and attempts to slash you multiple times before finishing with a large slam at her front. It's a bit hectic, and admittedly not a hard attack to avoid because she'll often miss you entirely if you're too close to her, but when it hits hard. Loretta, here at the Haligtree, truly gives mini-boss energy, in a way that I always find to be a real shame. It makes her incredibly forgetful in the grand scheme of things, something this voter agrees with. I think that for me, Loretta, Knight of the Haligtree, has always been pretty meh. She's a repeat boss who is way too easy for the part of the game that she's in. The first Loretta that you fight is far more impressive and mysterious in my opinion, as she is the final boss of a side dungeon. Additionally, after a fight, you meet Rani, which is super memorable. Loretta in the Haligtree, by comparison, feels just like a little speed bump on the way to Melania. I think this says it all. The fact that Loretta's main voter critiques stem towards her placement in the game, and not really her fight or difficulty, is proof that her rematch just didn't capture 1,000,000 hearts. At number 22, we have Borealis of the Freezing Fog, who scored a total average of 5.62 out of 10. The last of the field boss dragons, Borealis is your pick for the hardest in-game, and I can definitely see it. While he doesn't have the extreme Scarlet Rot AoE of Xeek's, Borealis instead has similar issues with Frostbite. His Ice Breath is the big one, but Borealis can cause Freezing Mist to appear during the fight that does stagger damage to the player in Torrent, and more importantly, can actually damage you with his Deafening Roar attack, which also builds up status damage alongside the Mountaintop's damage scaling. Basically, Borealis can kill you the quickest, and the traditional dragon weak spot, the head, is a no-go because of that screech. So instead, your best bet is to just hack at the legs and avoid any and all AoEs as best you can, going for a more long, drawn-out fight that will have you feeling exhausted by the end. Difficulty-wise, that's the main justification I can see for it reaching above the other dragons, though admittedly, I do enjoy a good tussle with Borealis. Of course, the last dragon you face in the open world would have a way to protect its head. You just have to hope you're not fatigued with the game when you get to him, and I think you'll have a lot more fun. Unlike this voter, who definitely had a lot of difficulty complaints. One boss I want to shout out the difficulty of, and not in a good way, is Borealis. I now feel for anyone whose build centers on holy damage when coming up against something like Malekith or Radagon, because Borealis's 80% resistance to slash and pierce should be a crime. Their moveset isn't even that complex, it's just the basic dragon attacks that weren't that hard to avoid with a Geel in Limgrave, let alone by the time you reach the mountaintops. That is, with the exception of that Screech attack, which comes out ridiculously fast and will pretty much always frostbite you. It isn't as hard as bosses with more complicated attacks or higher damage output, but it's just tedious to get through if you're using a slash damage weapon, which are the ones I tend to gravitate to, and then get caught out when Borealis is at 10% HP because you just wanted to finish it there and then. So I was right, the difficulty ranking of Borealis does come from the perceived tedium his boss fight presents, as you're forced to stay away from the head to avoid the Screech, meaning you can never hit the boss for full damage. I wonder how it'll be now that people have access to the Dragon Scale Blade in the DLC. You can technically reach it before you face Borealis in a fresh save. Maybe some food for thought? At number 21, we have Estelle, Natural Born of the Void, who scored a total average of 5.75 out of 10. Everybody's favourite eldritch abomination, Estelle lurks beneath the Moonlight Altar deep below the caverns of Noxtella, and has the ability to fight at both melee and range. His giant space lasers are almost always a guarantee to hit you when you first enter the arena, with surprisingly fast dodge timings, and later into the battle he goes full space creature and can summon a horde of meteors to rain down on the player with reckless abandon. At close range, he's got his giant arms, which he can use to either hit the player normally with various swipes, or maybe he'll leave a few nebula trails that explode after a few moments. What about his pincer grab attack that you have to avoid, or his ability to catch you in multiple gravity attacks if you're too close? The trick with Estelle though is that despite his vast moveset, the closer you are to his head, the more likely you are to win the fight. Estelle's weak spot is just not that good at avoiding your hits, and many of his arm swipes and nebula trails don't reach inwards enough to hit players hugging the pincers. It's why Estelle teleports a lot in order to avoid getting too cornered, while allowing for more ranged attacks as you work to catch up to him. I'd be remiss not to mention the exclusive grab attack from the Estelle rematch in the snowfield as well, where he clone jutsus the house down boots mama, and your only way to dodge is by standing in the center of the arena. It's genuinely terrifying. I'm actually shocked not to see any Estelle comments from the voters. I figured someone would want to talk about this space monstrosity, but hey ho, I figure the difficulty just comes from the surprisingly large moveset and the high damage output. For me, Estelle has the same energy as the tree spirits. He's easy enough to where I feel like I should be able to beat him, but tough enough to where I feel a little embarrassed when he kills me. But I actually enjoy his fight, which is the main difference. At number 20, we have Lich Dragon Fortisax, who scored a total average of 5.91 out of 10. Fortisax is such a special case because it's a boss that has all the makings of a top 15 or even top 10 fight in terms of difficulty, yet for some reason it has one major flaw that makes it just a tad bit too easy for its place in the game: the health bar. He has just 12,903 HP, which for a dragon of his size and scope is too paltry to create a tangible difficulty. Why this sticks out is that Fortisax is the last required boss to obtain the Mending Rune of the Death Prince, an item required for the Duskborn ending of the game. For something so consequential, the fight ends up relying purely on the presentation of the encounter to stick in our minds. And to be fair, Fortisax does just that, from the dark purple and brown sickly hues of the arena, to the warped painted skybox that oozes personality, to the absolutely jaw-dropping soundtrack where whoever was playing that organ decided to go hard. It's insane. The fight itself, HP notwithstanding, is a massive step up from our previous bosses, with Fortisax having a host of AoE-based red lightning and deathblight attacks to make your life a living hell. He's got the giant lightning spears that can be slammed into the ground for massive explosions. He's got an Adula's Moonblade style attack called Fortisax's Glaive, where he Beyblades into the player from the air, and there's the rest of the usual dragon attacks as well. The toughest for me were the lightning AoEs that get stuck to you when you're close to the boss, which you'd have to dodge away before they strike. I didn't realize they were an actual mechanic that stops you from hugging Fortisax the whole fight, so perhaps I'll be a little more careful on a future playthrough. Now, our one voter for this segment came to the realization that maybe, just maybe, Fortisax was their favorite boss. Take a listen. I never looked at all the bosses back to back like this, and when I did, Fortisax came up as my clear favorite. I love his arena with the haunting visage of Godwyn overshadowing a melancholic, corrupted pool before the roots of the Erd Tree. I love the haunting grandeur of his OST, I love the aesthetic of his design, and I love the fight itself. This one was a 2-try attempt for me on my first run, and I know many people say he's too easy, but I feel the balance hits just right for me. The health pool is a touch small, but I would argue this is balanced perfectly for the amount of shit he sends raining down on you. The randomized lightning bolts sporadically hitting the field, along with the elements of Deathblight making your day miserable if it stacks up, means you don't want to be sitting here with him all day. Sorry, 40-old boy. It ensures you're always on your toes and not panic rolling too hard, as you need to be in control at all times. I remember my first attempt being a case of being wowed by the design and music and thinking I was just gonna breeze through it and kick back given all the comments, before being quickly humbled and needing to give myself a shakedown, grip my controller, and go back in for round 2 with a fresher mindset. I didn't get stuck here, but I needed to focus. Best feeling I like to experience in most boss fights. As always, Billy, thank you so much for your content. Your videos are the highlights of my week. As a sleep-deprived dad, I need your passionate and heartfelt content to perk me up from sleep deprivation and limited downtime. Thank you so much. Firstly, I just want to say, commenter, I hope you found some sleep after writing this comment, because sleep deprivation is the worst. But the fact that my videos are helping in those times is honestly pretty cool, so thank you for the kind words. I do think you're right about the HP being low to counteract Fortisax's Deathblight mechanics. Nobody wants to get to the last 10% of a fight only to get Deathblighted at the end, especially if you did everything else right and still have a ton of healing. My compromise would just be to cancel out the Deathblight attacks after a certain HP threshold, but that's just my 2 cents. I really think that was a good analysis of what makes Fortisax so fun. I just wish we had more time to enjoy him when we fight him, you know? At number 19, we have Margit the Fell Omen, who scored a total average of 6.03 out of 10. The first boss in the game, and in my opinion one of the hardest, Margit is the type of encounter that never gets easier with time. A new playthrough means nothing when I've got this old man throwing light daggers at me while I try to heal, or having him bring the pain down with his massive hammer, and yet his vast moveset of holy weapons is exactly why I love fighting him. Margit is a refreshing change of pace in a series where the first bosses tend to be pretty simplistic. He starts off relatively tame, has a few mix-ups in his combos to keep you guessing, but then goes balls to the walls for his enraged state to make you work for the win, and no matter what you do, he'll never jump off of the map. I think it's fitting he's the first boss to break the 6-point margin, and I'd argue he could end off even higher on this list, and it would still be justified. But let's get some voters in here. This boss was such a brilliant skill check as a funnel to Limgrave as the first open area. Iconic lines, foul tarnished, in search of the Elden Ring, emboldened by thy flame of ambition. I will always remember setting an alarm for the middle of the night to get up and play in my final closed network test session, only to defeat Margit on my final attempt in the allotted time slot. For people who first played Elden Ring during the network test, Margit held a special place as the main boss players could face prior to Stormveil, and this was pre-release, meaning no nerfs. Just you, Margit, and your flames of ambition. I can't imagine how good it felt to take down a boss FromSoft likely didn't expect many to defeat during that time. That's not to say every voter had a good experience though. When an early game skill check is that hard, there are a few bridges that are bound to be burned. Simply, Margit is the worst experience of my life. Even having beat the game many times now, I still die to Margit a bare minimum of 10 times a playthrough. I'm not sure if it's the insane reach, the speed that to me seems faster than Melania at times, or what it is. There's just something about Margit's moveset I was never able to get, and Margit is the sole reason I hadn't touched the game for a year or two before the DLC release. This boss took my soul and refuses to give it back. And this isn't just a one-off person's opinion either. I've seen over the years the Reddit posts, the YouTube videos, heck, I'm even guilty of clowning on Margit for being too hard for his role in the game. I'm not entirely sure where I stand at this point in time in 2025, but I won't deny that his difficulty is tantamount to his experience. At number 18, we have Elmer of the Briar, who scored a total average of 6.05 out of 10. While the Shaded Castle variant is the one this entry focuses on, the Dragon Barrow Bell-Bearing Hunter is arguably the hardest form of this fight, and would bump it up a few notches if it were my personal ranking. As it stands, Elmer of the Briar is a tough boss to fight because he has some of the weirdest moves to play around. He uses the power of the Force to swing his sword independently of his own body. What this means is that you're almost never going to find time to heal if you're attempting to dodge backwards and make distance, because that distance will never come. The trick is instead to dodge inwards and around Elmer, getting brief moments to heal after attacks you know he won't follow up. Perhaps the toughest attack for me was his shield bash, as it comes out so quickly and does so much damage depending on the variant of the fight that it can end an attempt in mere moments. Not to add to that it moves halfway across the arena every time he uses it. Add in that the Shaded Castle variant of the fight has an extremely cramped arena filled with furniture that needs to be broken down before you can effectively dodge the boss, and you've got a fight that asks a lot of the player while giving you no room to breathe. However, it's a fight in an optional dungeon that many players will miss on their first pass through Altus, and that brings up an issue that one voter mentions. I don't like Elmer of the Briar. In concept, I love that we can fight Darth Vader in Elden Ring, but the fight is just ugh. I feel like I'm either so overleveled it's done in 2 minutes, or I die so many times in under 2 minutes that I overlevel just to get it over with. There is no joy in it for me. Like with many Elden Ring bosses, the difficulty discussion is somewhat hampered by the fact that many of the fights can be accessed at any point in the game. So what someone finds hard due to arriving at the intended level, others find easy because they found an area super late into the game. Elmer feels like a poster boy for this sort of thing, which is why I suspect the Bell-Bearing Hunter fights were added in-game as well. Just find the one that matches your level and go at it. Elmer is my favourite non-remembrance boss, and such an underrated fight IMO. His swings hit hard at close and long range, and his visual and weapon design is just so frickin' cool. The Mirai Executioner Sword is my go-to weapon, even if it's not the best in the game, and I always go out of my way to fight every single Bell-Bearing Hunter for their fun and striking moveset, and useful crafting drops. Yeah, this is my opinion too. Elmer is just a peak design visually. The barbed wire, the unique battle system, and his oppressive nature means that I do remember him. In a sea of very bog-standard boss fights in Elden Ring, he's a force of power that stands above the rest in many ways. At number 17, we have the Draconic Tree Sentinel, who scored a total average of 6.15 out of 10. I won't lie, this is the first boss I'm actually surprised to see this high, as while I certainly find the Draconic Tree Sentinels to be tough fights, I'm not sure they'd be in my top 20. So why do you guys find them so difficult? I think it's something to do with how hard they hit. Wielding the giant dragon greatclaw weapon that can crush any foe beneath their heels, it often feels like 2 to 3 hits is more than enough to silence your attempts before they can even start. And because each attack hits hard, you're constantly on the back foot healing, which will trigger the Sentinel's horse to breathe a fireball at you because they input read. It's a little devious, but asks the player to earn their heals as you dodge fireballs and get in close to chip away at the boss's health. If you know how to handle a tree sentinel, you've got a good baseline for their draconic divas. Then phase 2 hits, and you get a taste of the ancient red lightning that they're known for, and this is your sink or swim moment. I love the honed bolt that you have to dodge out of the way as it's slammed down on your position. It's a timing I'm pretty used to, and then he has 2 different lightning slams that send random red bolts across the ground you have to be wary of. It's a lot to keep track of. Eventually he will run out of lightning and have to recharge for a while, which gives you an opportunity to fight back, and as long as you can handle the pressure, you will come out on top. I think it's a great fight, but no voter comments means I can only assume I hit the nail on the head in regards to the difficulty. Could also just be that some people wanted to enter Lane-Dell early, and dealing with this guy was a roadblock. That's probably more likely. At number 16, we have Morgott, the Omen King, who scored a total average of 6.21 out of 10. My personal favourite boss of Elden Ring's base game, Morgott is our rematch against Margit, except now he's allowed to use his full strength. The light weapons we're used to get brought out at the start of the fight, with us getting introduced to his new attacks like his light spears and his light blades that rain down from the heavens as we go. And it's all fun and games until we cause Morgott's curse to spill across the arena, defiling the ground beneath the Erd Tree and causing him to go into a full religious rage, which leads to the flaming sword swings and flippy dippy shit we all know and love. Morgott, similar to Fortisax, is a boss that doesn't have a lot of HP in comparison to his peers, but he does have a high damage output, and if he gets you on the back foot for even a moment, you will find yourself 3 heals down and no damage on the boss. It happened to me in my last playthrough. I did a ton of damage to him, then thought I'd mess around to get more footage, only for Morgott to start absolutely wrecking me into the ground with his fast swipes and stabs, and that's why I love him. It's the rematch we all wanted to see, and it ends in spectacular fashion. Nobody's saying he's the hardest fight in the game, but I think he is right where he needs to be. Although maybe I would argue Margit is a harder fight overall. We've got a few voters here who want to chat, so have at you. If Morgott got some life support, we would see people praising his name. Bestie, we're praising his name regardless. Do I wish he had a little blood transfusion to get some more health? Sure, but I still only ever see nothing but respect for Morgott in comments. Morgott has such a masterfully crafted moveset that I always feel bad for how easy his woefully small HP bar makes him. I don't think I've ever had a fight against Morgott where I saw his full moveset in one encounter. It might just be me, but I feel like the game highly encourages you to do Mount Gelmir and the Volcano Manor before Lane-Dell, and Morgott just becomes a pushover if you go that route. He should be a hard mid-game roadblock, not a road bump for such a cool and complex character. I fully agree, Mount Gelmir feels like the next step after you reach Altus, and by the time you're done there, Morgott just isn't as tough as he should be. But I love that you're recognizing how well crafted his moveset is regardless. Even with his fatal HP flaw, we can all recognize that a lot of love went into his fight. It's just, the potential is so close, yet so far. Morgott is amazing to me. He's the best main game fight alongside his brother. He's got such fun and aggressive combos. The story aspect of both his tragic lore and also being your rival character throughout the first part of the game, incredibly varied combos with him summoning different conjured weapons, and even though people seem to find him really easy, I find he still pretty consistently kills me a couple of times per playthrough. And my first time through, he was a very big wall for my progression, despite me killing all available shard bearers before him, due to not understanding how the Towers of Divinity work and having no idea how to enter Lane-Dell. And all his dialogue goes super hard. Have it writ upon thy meager grave, felled by Morgott, last of all kings. To quote another YouTuber, every line of his just absolutely destroys our career. And I also love how after you beat him, his shriveled up body appears in the arena and you have one final conversation where he laments to you, which only solidifies how his resistance is ultimately pointless, as you go on to prove him wrong and undo his life's work. God, I love Morgott so much. No notes, Morgott's an icon, a legend, truly the tragic moment. I just love seeing positive Morgott posts, and so do you, the viewers, as he got 21 votes for favourite boss, coming in a comfortable 4th place on that side of the poll. At number 15, we have the full-grown Falling Star Beast, who scored a total average of 6.28 out of 10. One of my favourite non-major bosses of the game, I think this creature chilling atop Mount Gelmir doesn't get enough credit for its stellar moveset and overall design. We fight regular Falling Star Beasts every now and then, but the full-grown variant has a few extra moves towards the end to make the fight a little more tricky, mainly being able to reverse gravity once it hits its enraged state, this being a similar move to that used by Estelle, hinting at a connection between the two. And a giant gravity ray, which is a large fuck-off purple beam that is fired across the arena. But said arena is also a perfect way to avoid the attack due to the way it slopes upwards and downwards. Combined with the regular Falling Star Beast moveset that I already love, like the triple charge attack that gives you the feeling of a matador dodging a bull, or the earth pillars that you have to dodge from while the beast walks around, serving it on the runway with a little strut, it's just a really fun fight. It's a great test for the point of the game it's at, and I think it's criminal that this variant is only ever seen here at Mount Gelmir. It's the same as the Dragonkin Soldier of Noxtella, and how that guy's phase 2 is locked behind a single encounter in Ainsel River, except that at least the Falling Star Beasts have a super strong basic moveset to fall back on for subsequent appearances. Am I shocked to see no voter comments on this guy? Nope, I believe he is one of the most underrated Elden Ring bosses for a reason, but at least you all recognize he is a difficult one. At number 14, we have the Fire Giant, who scored a total average of 6.3 out of 10. If I did this poll when the game first came out, Fire Giant would likely have landed much higher on the polls, with a lot of players, myself included, unsure of the proper way to handle the fight. Phase 1 is relatively straightforward, with you needing to avoid its giant swings and break the ankle bracelet to reveal a weak point. The main challenge is just the spatial awareness of knowing what attacks are being used. That little homing fireball that explodes after a short while was a nightmare for me regardless of the playthrough. And of course, just look at this man, he hits like a truck. Fire Giant can whoop your ass into a pancake and there's nothing you can do to stop it if you mistime a dodge. Phase 2 is where the confusion came in, as at the time of release, all the news publications and guides just said to keep smacking the legs and feet like in Phase 1. As it turns out, that's fucking stupid, because the pyromancy added into Phase 2 is designed to be faced from the front of the boss. What you have to do is hit the boss's hands and the giant eye on his chest, baiting attacks until you whittle the health down. And once I realized that on my recorded run, the Fire Giant became significantly easier, not to the point of trivializing the fight, more so just putting me on an even playing field with the guy and making it fun. I also didn't feel like attacking the eye did much bonus damage, but I might just be insane on that one. The main difficulty I had with this method was that his hands didn't stay on the ground long enough for me to capitalize after every attack. It was very trial and error to figure out what worked and didn't work for the Fire Giant, yet now I'm just excited to fight him in future runs. Also, if you fight him head-on in Phase 2, he can't roll on top of you because you're not at his sides, which is worth it for that alone. Nor will he attempt to roll away from you quite as much, because in my original playthrough using the IGN strats, the Fire Giant kept rolling away from me like a man on his way to Joella, the Slasian Diva of Los Angeles drag show. It's a shame then that with 10 votes for the least favourite boss, he's not very beloved, tying for 3rd place with the Putrid Tree Spirit. He's not that bad, guys, come on. Voters, you're with me, right? The Fire Giant is my least favourite fight because of all the rolling around he does. It's a pain that every time I get close to him he just roll spams. That's the player's job, not the boss's. Every time I try to catch up to him, I either exhaust my stamina sprinting, or have to spend time mounting, dismounting Torrent, taking time off of the already few openings the boss has. Okay, in Phase 1, I can agree the rolling can be a bit much if you get unlucky with his AI, but I also think his Phase 1 is much quicker to get through, and if you fight him in Phase 2 from the front, as we established, he rolls so much less often that it stops being a problem. I respect your struggle though, but I do think there are ways around it. Fire Giant can take its flaming balls and shove them where that stupid eyeball can't see them. Well, not every comment can be a winner. I have very one-sided takes on the Fire Giant, so I might just go on a little bit of a rant here, hope that's alright. On the one hand, his difficulty is just alright, I think his second phase is definitely harder, but in my opinion, a lot of people make it way harder and way more annoying for themselves than they should. When the conversation stops being about Melania, Malekith, or Godfrey every goddamn second and someone finally decides to bring up Fire Giant, I always notice that most people tend to fight his second phase either from behind or on the sides, or maybe they try to hit the eye the entire time, which, by the way, this phase is meant to be tackled from the front as the hands are weaker than the rest of his body. Regardless, doing so makes it significantly less fun, and I think that's one of the reasons people seem to dislike Fire Giant. I, on the other hand, can't get enough of this fight. It's actually one of my favorites from the base game, and I wear that opinion like a badge of honor, because I have never met someone who truly adored everything this battle offers quite like I do. Sure, his health pool and damage output are crazy high, which does make him a bit more difficult, but I spy with my motherfucking eye a teeny weeny detail that might be the cause of this. Hint, it's a Fire Giant! Anyways, this boss is pretty average in terms of difficulty, but I think I got it easier than most because of how much I appreciate the fight, and perhaps I'm alone in this, but does anyone else find the Phase 1 has perfectly reasonable tells for every one of his attacks, even when you're standing straight under him? No? Sorry for the long-ass comment, but I wanted to spread some much-deserved love on Fire Giant at least once, love your vids. Also, his OST is absolute peak. Oh, thank God I'm not insane, somebody agrees with me. I truly do feel that Fire Giant is one of Elden Ring's most misunderstood bosses, and even though the knowledge of how to properly fight him is more widely available nowadays, it still catches strays from people who think IGN's Fire Giant's stay behind and close to the Fire Giant's back while drive-bying on torrent strategy was the intended solution. At number 13, we have the Deathrite Bird, who scored a total average of 6.52 out of 10. Another boss in contention for least favorite in the game, with 9 total votes on that front. Yeah, I can see it. I have a love-hate relationship with the Deathrite Birds, as depending on the location, they're either incredibly easy or incredibly hard. The one in Liurnia, easy. The one in Caelid, tricky. The one in the Snowfield, simple. The one near Castle Sol, PTSD-inducing. It's the only Deathrite Bird you'll likely encounter on purpose during your playthrough, as it always appears on your way to Castle Sol, and by God it's a brutal fight. When you're still learning all the very different AoEs and how the Ghost Flame reacts to the environment and how it spreads along the floor, you'll be tempted to stick on Torrent. Other times you'll be tempted to just go in for hits and see how much damage you can do only to get blown up by an AoE. And this fucker comes back in the DLC to continue haunting us, with my partner having a lengthy showdown against the bird that took a while because of the damage of its attacks, combined with just how perfectly you have to time those dodges. Oh, and Death Blight if you stay too close to the Screeches, and arrows in the air that fire down at the player, and you get the picture. Deathrite Birds are a lot, and I suspect my voters have some things to say. The Deathrite Bird near Castle Sol, the only one I've ever fought in the base game, was the most weirdly difficult boss. There's just something about its movements that doesn't click, and I always find myself dodging at the wrong time or not at all. It's strange, since the attacks don't feel unfairly quick or unreasonable to avoid. It feels like how a lot of people talk about the Dancer of the Boreal Valley in Dark Souls 3, how it messes with your established rhythm. I've never struggled with that boss myself, but the Deathrite Bird somehow does the same thing for me. That one in Charos is utter nonsense though. It's an interesting take on the Deathrite bird, because I definitely see that its movements are a little janky, a little erratic, and I fully agree that the Charo's hidden Gravebird can fuck off having the little baby Gravebirds around to make the fight more annoying. At least their weakness to holy damage can be exploited with a lot of fun weapons in the post-game, which is a nice reprieve after the damage they've done over the years. But hey, they're one of the toughest field bosses in the game for a reason. We've all died to them a few times, and I still kinda like them. They definitely deserve a spot this high. At number 12, we have the Blackblade Kindred, who scored a total average of 6.57 out of 10. There are two of these creatures found in the lands between, at the Bestial Sanctum and the Forbidden Lands, each wielding a different set of weapons. Whether you're facing off against a whirling twin blade or a massive axe, I find these intimidating gargoyles to be quite the opponents. They've got a very fast, agile moveset, which means locking onto them will take your camera on a roller coaster ride. They've got two weapons, each that they can switch between to keep you guessing, which is tough if you end up good against one moveset but not the other. And they both have access to a variant of Malekith's Destined Death for their special moves, which can rapidly decrease your maximum health for a short period of time. They're both fought in late game areas with tough scaling. I saved the Bestial Sanctum boss for quite late in my playthrough and still found it super tough to handle, to the point where I thought I wasn't really ready to fight it. And the Forbidden Land variant, I tend to skip until I reach the Grace at the Rolled Elevator, and then I'll turn around and beat it up. There's only one voter comment I could find on the Kindred, but hey, it's a good one. I might be in the minority, but I think Blackblade Kindred is one of the most underrated bosses in terms of difficulty, as he is essentially a larger health bar version of Malekith that's immune to bleed, if only a little slower. I wouldn't say he's more difficult than Malekith, but he is definitely deserving of some recognition. Also love the vids, keep up the work, love from Ireland. Shout out to Ireland, I'm Irish on my mother's side, so in a way, you are my people. I definitely agree that Blackblade Kindreds are underrated, as they're often not brought up in difficulty rankings because of other main bosses with more elaborate movesets. But I think about what type of bosses kill me more often than not in a given playthrough, and it's the field bosses like these guys who give me the most trouble. They really are just Malekith's students, without the flippy dippiness of his phase 2, and I respect it. At number 11, we have Commander Nile, who scored a total average of 6.74 out of 10. The last boss on today's video, Nile just barely misses out on part 3, and yet I think he's fully deserving of this spot. When I first went to Castle Sol during my recorded run, Nile beat my ass. My weapon wasn't fully upgraded and I wasn't doing enough damage to get the kill. At least I could handle his spirits with a simple backstab as they spawn and go from there, but once it's just me and him, he becomes a fierce warrior I can't predict. There's something about the way his prosthetic moveset works that I find incredibly difficult to read, and the slight AoE of his electric strikes leaves me struggling to figure out his moveset. It's impressive that he's so hard, because I find him tougher than Commander O'Neill in the Swamp of Aeonia, whose literal gimmick was whirling up Scarlet Rot winds. Even when I came back fully ready to face Nile, he still gave me a tough time. He's got the ability to close distance, he's got cool flippy moves that have him whirling through the air, he's got a weapon that's just so unique I can't help but love it. It's not a particularly groundbreaking moveset, just some whirlwind arts, 2 storm kick variants in his halberd combo, and I barely even register the Spectral Knights at the start since they're gone so quickly once you know how to handle them, but it's just the way he uses every move to great effect that makes Nile so threatening. No voter comments, but I don't think Nile needs anyone to justify his difficulty. He sits right where he wants to be, and needs to be. And that's part 2. Did you agree with the community placements? Let us know down below, and be sure to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all my future videos. Next time, it is the top 10 hardest bosses in Elden Ring, based on my community. How exciting. I'd love to give a special shout out to my YouTube channel members for supporting me for another month. You guys are amazing, thank you so much. It's $4.99 a month, it gets you early access to future videos, and a shout out in the description and at the end of videos as well. If you want to follow me, check out my Blue Sky, that's where I'm active, and I'll see you guys next time for another video. Adios!